Okay. Make sure my mic's on. Can you hear me okay? Well, it's good to be back with you today on our last day of this incredible conference. What a remarkable few days this has been. First of all, I want to say thank you again to Carlos and his team, the conference sponsors, and to all of you that took the time to be here with us in the great state of Utah. Now, I wanted to do a couple of thank yous here at the very beginning as well, not just to Carlos and his great team, but I wanted to thank the amazing staff, the hotel staff and catering staff that we have had for this entire conference, and here they come. We are grateful to each and every one of you. The food has been amazing. The service has been top-notch. The work you do is so appreciated by all of us. A special thanks to the sales manager, Megan Butters. Megan, thank you. And the director of banquet operations, Javier Robles. Javier, thank you. And for all the extra work and attention to the detail to make this great conference even better. Let's give them all one more round of applause and thank each and every one of them. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Gratitude is incredibly important. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Grateful. Thank you. Gratitude is so important, and gratitude to all of those that we engage with and see in our lives, not just at our homes, but as we travel and as we work. In North Dakota, it's an incredibly important part of our state operations. In fact, it's at the core of our value set around our state operations. Across all of our agencies, we've adopted a shared purpose to empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. It's a noble vision that one applies to so much of what we all do in the transportation industry. Let me say those words again. Empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. Those phrases are actually on every conference room, every office, every computer, our business cards. I can go on and on. Throughout the state. It's on our badges. It's everywhere that we can be reminded of how important it is. This conference has been full of great information. For example, on day one, we learned that Carlos is still here after a one-year ski trip turned into a lifetime residency. And isn't Utah lucky to have Carlos and his decision to stay after his ski trip? And it's also, like Carlos said on day one, if you can take one piece of information home to put into practice, that's a win. I found more, and I'd love to highlight just a sampling of my favorite moments from the conference and share how we can use it to empower people, improve lives, and inspire success. On empower people. On the first day, Natalie, the economist, talked about the economy, but she also left us with these impacting words on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is a fact. Equity is a choice. Inclusion is an action. Belonging is the outcome. She also reminded us that if we're not part of the solution, we don't have a plan, we're part of the problem. In Earl Key's Monday presentation, he also talked about DEI like a dance. Diversity is who's invited. Equity is where everyone can participate and enjoy the dance. And inclusion is where everyone can select songs from the playlist. Isn't that true? Deputy Secretary Polly Trottenberg talked about infrastructure bill and how it's an opportunity to invest in safety, equity, and innovation. She said that answers are not all in Washington, D.C. Isn't that true? They are going to be leaning heavily on state DOTs for guidance to empower people. Under Improved Lives, we heard Deputy Secretary Trottenberg talk passionately about what she called the climate crisis. She reminded us that the challenges we're facing are big and complex, but with challenge comes opportunity, and if we tackle it together, we can overcome. In the breakout session, Leading the Move Forward with More Resilient Culture, we learned that just like safety, resilience is more effective when it's baked in to everything we do at every level of the organization. Resiliency isn't just the responsibility of the person at the top, it's across all sectors of an organization. And for all of our state DOTs, it includes our legislatures, and it includes our governor's office as well. We also learned that it's wise to use the crisis happening in other areas to improve your program forward. Yesterday morning, Luis Alero talked about the top 3 questions to ask your team. What's working well? Where are we struggling? What do we want to do differently? It's a worthwhile investment to make sure we are well and our well-being is in check, because then we can take care of our team's well-being. This is, by the way, a center, let me stop there for a second. This is a center point of our work in North Dakota with Gallup and employee engagement. Well-being of ourselves and well-being of our teams and well-being of our organizations. In the Strong Partnerships and Building Trust, we learned 4 tips to good collaboration: establishing relationships in a very comfortable way, understanding common goals, because if there aren't common goals, then what's the point? See it from the opposite perspective, have empathy, don't assume bad intent. Under Inspire Success, I would say that the host event Monday night certainly left me inspired, and it did. What a remarkable resource that Salt Lake City and the state of Utah has in this incredible facility with these incredible sort of story of the history of this region. So it's not only a resource and I think an asset for Utah, but for the nation. Please give another round of, and the group that put all that together, our group that was there, we had a great time. We kind of spread out and went all over the building. We had a great time. But it took a lot of effort in putting that endeavor together. Oh, and by the way, I didn't even mention the tribal dancers. I wanted to mention that just before, on Saturday, before I left to come here on Sunday, I went to one of the largest gatherings, powwows in the world. 500 dancers from all over the world, all representing their tribal nations in one place at one time. It was one of the most inspiring and beautiful things that I have ever seen. And that was a reminder of that, and I am grateful for it. So let's give another round of applause to the team from Utah for all of their work. You know, they inspire our success, these events. And we have a lot that inspires our success each and every day. We learned from Natalie on the first day that 8 out of the 10 fastest growing states are from the WASHTO region. Amazing. She also talked about many impacts of COVID, but none as impactful as teleworking. I think, as I said in some of my first comments, or on the comments on the first day, teleworking will be one of the things that come out of COVID, this terrible year that has affected all of our families and our lives. There will be many things that come out of it that are going to be transformative. One of them is teleworking, especially to global warming, traffic congestion, how we design mobility. Natalie explained that we're changed forever by teleworking and that she believes it's the biggest single structural change to impact our lives over the next 2 decades. In the breakout session, Communicating the Benefits of Transportation Initiatives, Elizabeth and Lloyd taught us about the power of storytelling and how our messaging should revolve around the hero, But we're going to recast the hero as the people and the benefits they receive and take the hero status away from the project itself. I'm a storyteller too, if you haven't noticed. And it has been, for me, probably the most effective tool with our state legislature, with our communities, to have the points personalized, absorbed, understood deeply, so that we can come back again and engage them in the next dialogue and the next dialogue. Storytelling is powerful. The road usage charge, the RUC meeting, the team discussed the research happening surrounding ways to shift the reliance on gas tax to a per mile fee, which can be administered more equitably to all drivers. There are 17 states that are part of RUC. We know this is going to be met with resistance, but it's a necessary change. And the group is doing a fantastic job with their pilot projects, and I want to thank them, all of them, for their hard work. It's clear our conference speakers and the people in this room are some of the most passionate about what they do. It was a recurring theme in the speakers we heard, the conversations that took place in the events and the discussions that took place in the vendor hall. I love Deputy Secretary Trottenberg's answer to her question on what drives her. From the moment you step out the door, you encounter transportation, and at the core, it's about mobility, about serving the public, about keeping our states running, and connecting people to what matters. And I can't think of anything that has a stronger impact on daily life for sure, is our transportation system. I do love this work. And I know you do too, because of that reason. It affects everyone's life. Everyone's life. Every family, every child. It affects all of our economies, statewide, nationally. And it makes a difference. And I don't know, a lot of people don't think about it all the time. I didn't. But before, when I was first starting in my career, and now I can't stop thinking about it. I want to close with Victoria's insightful question from the first day. Thank you for it. What will be our legacy? I want you to think about it for a second. What will be your legacy in your organizations, with your families, with your community, with your work? Think about it as part of this conference. We have a small amount of time to make the biggest impact we can. I often said to my staff, I wish I had another life, because I'm not done. I'm not done yet. In her insightful talk, she talked about how it's the number of partnerships we have that make us successful. And isn't that true? And it's about partnerships like the ones I see here, the partnerships between not only the CEOs of WASHTO and all of the staff that run these great transportation agencies, but the partnerships with all of our local governments, the partnerships with the federal government, the partnerships with our contractors, our consultants, the partnership we have, the family we have, working towards this shared mission. So I'll close there, and I'll thank you for your partnership, your friendship. And I hope you take what you've learned and use it to continue the great work that you're doing across the WASHTO region. Now, before Carlos comes back, because he's around, I can see him over there. Before Carlos comes back to the stage, I'd like to introduce John Barton. And I've known John for a number of years, and he's the National DOT Market Service Leader with HNTB. HNTB has been a major player in the transportation industry, a great partner, and has been working for years to bring innovation and imagination to the work they do. Please help me welcome John Barton.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this keynote session. As President Panos said, I'm John Barton with HNTB. Thank you for that kind introduction. I wanted to welcome all of you to this morning's session and just tell you on behalf of the 5,000 employees at HNTB how grateful we are to have had the chance to be here with all of you, our industry partners, our state DOTs, and to do it in person. What a great experience it's been, and it's wonderful to be with all of you. I also want to, before anything else, I want to thank all of our state CEOs, your teams, your sisters and brothers that are back home. It's been an extraordinarily difficult last 18 months. And you've been there on the front line working hard every day. Your teams have delivered. You've given us confidence that our transportation was available to us. You allowed me and my wife to get 30 Prime deliveries and FedEx deliveries to our homes every day. So you've done extraordinary work, and I know you never get thanked for that. So let's take a moment to give a round of applause to our state employees who have worked so tirelessly to keep the engine of America running during this pandemic. You know, at HNTB, we're so grateful for the opportunity to work for the WASHTO state DOTs and with our partners across this industry to deliver these innovative and transformative projects that all of you are putting forward. And we know, we've heard over the last few days that with this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and other local and state initiatives, there's never been a better opportunity for projects and programs to be advanced than there are today. And we know that it's going to take creativity and innovation that's much different than the things that we've worked on in the past. And for us at HNTB, we're so proud and honored to be a partner with all of you and to help you deliver on those. And here in the great state of Utah, a beautiful state that we're in today, examples of that kind of innovation and creativity are being spawned out of the Utah Transportation or Transit Authority's programs that we were blessed to be able to be a program manager with over the next 5 years. And the Utah DOT, as they've delivered on things like the Core I-15 project, the largest project in the state's history, and we were able to be a project manager there, and most recently the West Davis project. So those opportunities allow all of us in the industry and for us at HNTB the chance to help bring forward innovation and creativity to deliver on those things. And going forward, we know there's got to be more of that. So it's exciting that today at our keynote session, we're going to talk about those innovations. And, you know, when we think about pioneers and innovations, I think that the Utah Department of Transportation and all of the WASHTO state DOTs have been at the forefront of that. And so it's my pleasure now to introduce the person that will be moderating this panel, a man that needs no introduction. He is a true, humble servant leader, an inspiration and an example for all of us, a dear friend, a trusted colleague, and someone that inspires all of us to be better every day. So if you would join me now in welcoming to the stage with a warm round of applause, our friend, partner, and colleague, Mr. Carlos Braceras.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody.
Governor, sit.
There you go. Governor, you want to sit in the middle?
All right. Yeah.
Governors always go in the middle, right? Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to let you know that we are truly going to have a free-flowing conversation here we haven't really scripted much of it. I've written down some history, and it was funny. I wrote down the history off the top of my head, and then I went back and I found a federal highway website, and I got a little more details, and I was able to make some corrections to my close to 25 years now, looking at the history here. So first of all, I would like to introduce our panelist, our guest here today, and sitting directly to my left is Governor Leavitt. Governor Leavitt elected to 3 terms as governor. I remember when he was then asked to serve as administrator for EPA, and I don't know if the governor remembers this, but a Saturday morning I got the request to come up and help prepare him for his testimony. And I got a chance to sit on the big table where the legislators sit, and the governor sat at the little table, and it was a surreal experience to go through that. But after his work at EPA, he then went on to serve as Secretary of Health and Human Services. And John, I don't think I'll ever forget the evening we happened to stop by the apartment with Rich and Natalie and the governor there, and it was an amazing evening that we had. But during the pandemic, one of the first things that former Governor Herbert did was ask Governor Leavitt to come in and talk to the cabinet and the emergency response team and talk about the pandemic and what they had seen from Health and Human Services back when he did that service. And it was really eye-opening to me. And so he has a depth of experience in that area. And then to the left of the Gov, somebody who probably needs no introduction to this crowd, Tom Warren, former executive director of UDOT, but he was also he's a civil engineer, consultant, worked for the Corps of Engineers, and worked for Arizona DOT. And in my little history, I'll talk a little bit about the amazing team at Arizona DOT that Tom worked with. So we're gonna have some history, we're gonna have a story, and then we're gonna want to think about what lessons that came out of that epic adventure that so many people were part of. So going back into the late 80s, we had been working on the environmental impact statement for rebuilding I-15 just out here through the Salt Lake County area, going all the way back that far. And it was something that was just kind of dwelling within the organization. It was this huge project. We had no idea how we were going to pay for it. And so it didn't have the urgency to really move forward. The project ended up being, I wrote down 16, I was close, 16.2 miles. It had 7 interchanges and 130 bridges. The project, when we looked at it, and 3 system-to-system interchanges. And when we were out there, we had 3 lanes in each direction. Pavement was early 60s. But the piece that was manifesting itself, that provided some urgency to the engineers was we had several bridges where the concrete was falling off the bottom of the deck, and we were very innovative. We used scaffolding and plywood to keep that from falling down. And that was the visual that I think helped people understand a little bit of the urgency of the need for the rebuild. And as you think about the context of that, I want to give you a little sense of our organization. Now, we probably brag a lot here at Utah DOT, and for that I apologize, but we're pretty proud of where we were, but what we came to. We were an organization that didn't believe in ourselves back in the 80s and the early 90s. We had been beaten up pretty bad. I remember seeing a headline early on in my career, UDOT $40 million in the red, and there was a change of an executive director at that point, and we were not proud. We didn't have trust with the elected officials. And so here's an organization that was, I would say, we were timid. And the transition began with the appointment by Governor Leavitt of Craig Swick. And Craig Swick did not come from the transportation world, but he came from the vertical construction world. And he is an amazing man from a people perspective. When he talks to you, he made everyone feel like you're the most important person in the world. You guys know that kind of person, right? When you encounter them, you can tell it's not superficial when they're asking how you're doing. They truly care about how you're doing. And that was Craig. And he is an incredibly enthusiastic person, loved to ski and play tennis, and he did everything at 100%. So Craig began that rebuilding process from 93 through 1995. That was right, Tom, right? 95?
95.
Yeah. And then, again, another newspaper article, Craig had received a calling for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it was a pretty big deal, and it was a full-time gig. And so Craig took on the assignment, and we needed a new executive director at the time. Now, if you think of this project, we're still trying to think about how do we move this forward. A bunch of us had been working on it in pieces, but we didn't know how to move it. Quite honestly, we figured this was an 8 to 10 year project. It was bigger than anything we'd ever done. We had vision that we're going to do it traditionally. We're going to break it into a bunch of small pieces, and we're going to have a bunch of contractors out there, and we're going to try to figure out how to do this. But we needed a new executive director. We needed leadership. And I remember I was working at the Region 2 office, so our urbanized office here, and several of us were working on identifying an I-15 team because we had been working on what we called the General Development Plan, basically the business plan on how to move the project forward. And that's when I first had the opportunity to meet Tom Warren. Tom let us know that he would be appointed executive director the next day and was kind of interested in the I-15 job. And Tom received some pretty big challenges from the governor in terms of delivering that project, and I'm sure that's going to be part of the story that we have here. So our department and our perspective on what we do and why we do it changed really from that point going forward. And so there's 2 points in our UDOT history that we point back to. We point back to that point in time where all of a sudden we were faced with a challenge we had no idea how to deal with, and then the Olympics that you heard Natalie talk about earlier 2 days ago. Natalie was here, Governor. And so we wanted to start with a story and see if there's pieces that come out of this and see what we can use moving forward. So with that, I'd like to maybe start with you, Governor. From your perspective, you know, governors see things from a different perspective than those of us in the trenches. From your perspective, what's the story of this project and what does it mean to you?
Well, first, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Could I just comment that there is real value in looking back on these things, particularly, it's now been 25 years, and we've had a chance to see this in the context of 25 years. It looks differently than when you look at it with the imagining 25 years. And so many of the lessons that I think we will articulate today may not have been immediately evident at the time, but they're much more evident now. Let me put this whole situation in a larger frame. So I became governor in 1993. This is a point in time when the state was growing at a rate even faster than it is today. Today, I think it's the fastest growing state in the country over the last 10 years. It was even faster then. It was pretty good economic times. We had come out of a difficult period, and we were starting to see the dot-com boom go and the economy of the 90s flare. So the combination of the fact that the state was being fueled economically by this massive growth, people were beginning to become very uneasy about this place they had chosen to live, mostly because they loved the way it was changing. And when I ran for office, I came face to face with that and knew that one of the challenges, one of the long-term challenges I needed to deal with was managing growth. And we put it in the context of managing or of maintaining quality of life. That's an important realization because to the Department of Transportation, this looked like a highway project. To me, it was a major contributor to the overall atmosphere in which the state was operating and the need for us both economically and culturally to maintain a high quality of life. So we had traffic at this point that was, I mean, literally worse than Southern California during rush hour. I mean, our rush hour was longer and it was more intense. I had been taken out to see the plywood under the overpasses. I knew this was going to be an issue. And then another component. Shortly thereafter, we received the bid for the 2002 Winter Olympic Games. So if you can put in the context of then having a conversation with the Department of Transportation, look, we have to do something with these roads. We have this backstop of, we've got the Olympics coming. How long is this project going to take? Well, Governor, it looks like to us it'll be about 10 years. Well, it's now 1994. Do the math, that's 2004. So you're telling me we ought to bring the world here to show off our state and have we ought to have 17 miles and 130 structures torn up for them to see. That just isn't going to work. And so I was deeply concerned about it. I could see the reality of it, but it was an imperative I thought we had, not just because of the quality of life issue that I had committed to focus on, but also because of the Olympics and the importance of that. So this happened, this was all unfolding just as Carlos had suggested, as the head of the department needed to leave. And I was looking for a new head of the Department of Transportation. And hence Tom then entered my life. I think you'll see it was an important joint adventure for us. So why don't I stop there, and Tom, you can pick it up from there.
Yeah. So Tom, you're in Arizona. You're the deputy director, and as I look back at that, no disrespect to my team or any other team, but your other deputy director was former Secretary of Transportation Mary Peters, and Larry Bonine was the director, and I think many of us in this room have spent time and learned from Larry. It was quite the powerhouse Arizona team.
Well, the Arizona Department of Transportation was a great, I think, proving ground for me to come here and do what the governor and others expected. It was a great honor to become the executive director of the Utah Department of Transportation and be appointed by Governor Leavitt. It was really clear when I got here in June of '95 that we had to do something with I-15, and the plan was 10 years. But honestly, the road was falling apart before our eyes, and 10 years just wasn't the answer. The governor changed our vision, and this is great leadership at work, when he called me up to his office one day and in a very brief meeting, he says, "You know, Tom, we can't have this thing going on during the Olympics, and so you need to finish it not in 10 years, but in about 4.5 years." And I said, "Yes, we'll do that." And that was a very brief meeting. It was probably about a 15-minute meeting, and as it happened, our team was meeting at the DoubleTree Hotel over here by the arena, and I went down to give them the news, and I said, "I'll stop. Whatever you're working on, talking about today, stop. The new timeline is 4.5 years." And there was a pretty serious silence in the room, and then I had another commitment, so I left. And so I'm walking out through the lobby, and one of the principals that was in that room, one of our leaders in the department, comes running out, said, "Tom, do you realize what you just said?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you said 4.5 years." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "That's impossible." I said, "Well, that's what we're going to do." And asked the team to come up with a solution for building the project, which that process eventually led us to design build and set us on a course that honestly none of us envisioned in June of '95 when I came on board, but which then became the path forward to bring about the successful project.
So I'll add just a little context to that meeting. It was short, and I did, as Tom suggests, say, "Tom, we've got to find a different solution." But at the moment, as we had that, Tom said, "I have some ideas. If you give me 3 weeks, I'll come back." And so we agreed, 3 weeks. And he went back, had the conversation he reported, and 3 weeks later he came into the office and laid out a plan where, in fact, we could hypothetically build this in 4.5 or 5 years. That was our time, absolute had to finish time frame. And he laid out the vision of design build to me. And I remember saying to Tom, "Has anybody ever done this before?" To which he replied, "Not in highway building. It's a concept that's relatively well known in the vertical world, but no one has ever done this, but I believe it can be done."
Well, and Carlos mentions Larry Bonine, who was the director of ADOT, my boss before I came to Utah. He calls me up. He says, "Tom, if you pull this off, you'll be on the cover of Engineering News Record. And if you fail, you'll be on the cover of Engineering News Record."
Do you have a copy of that magazine?
No, I was never on the cover. The project was on the cover, and that's what's important. But, well, the governor gave us that charge, and then it was full speed ahead for design build. And that was really, truly the only way we could get the project done in that short amount of time.
I think it's important to pick up here and say, introducing a subject of this magnitude with this much change cannot be casually announced. We had to do two things, in my view. One was we had to bring a shared problem to the community. And we had to put this in the context of quality of life, not in the context of we got to build a highway. And I look back on this now, and I just think the whole thing was audacious. But this part goes along with it. I went to the news media. I went to the owners of the TV stations and owners of the newspapers and radio stations and said to them, "Look, we have a very large problem in the state. Our quality of life is eroding. And it's changing before our very eyes. You know it, I know it, everyone can feel it, and we've got to do something about it. But we're not going to be able to do anything about it until we can adopt a community-wide commitment to it, because it's going to require a substantial commitment on the part of every citizen. I'm not talking just about tax dollars, I'm talking about the inconvenience that we're going to go through, etc. And I would like you to give me, meeting the media, television stations, I want 2 hours, prime time, on 2 weeknights. Radio stations, I need the same thing. Newspapers, I need you to dominate with this story over the course of a couple of weeks, because we need to talk about, as a community, what problem we have. And they did it. And so we had what we refer to as the Growth Summit, where we literally had blackout television. You couldn't watch anything else. Cable was not that strong at this point. You could see one thing on all 3 channels, the Growth Summit. And there was serious conversation about a shared problem, the common pain we were all feeling of seeing our community change in front of us. And it wasn't just about highways. It was about the need for water. It was about the need for trails and open space. It was about what was happening with crime. It was, what are the things that are going to change if we don't do this? And you could just see the attitude in the community begin to change. And so at that point we began to say, and we have the Olympics coming as well, and we began to introduce I-15. This is a problem. And we laid a context for this problem, and we laid a context for why we had to do something entirely different. There had to be an answer to, has anyone ever done this before? No, but we think we can do it, and here's why. And by the way, we don't have a lot of good choices. And I think both Tom and I would say one of the lessons that comes from this is it's amazing how absence of alternative clears the mind.
Yeah.
You have to evaluate this kind of risk in the context of the alternatives. And the alternative of having the state torn up for 10 years with all of the attendant worries that come with that, not just safety, but the economics begin to expand, and it just wasn't a good option. So.
Well, and I think as we compress the timeline for I-15 down to 4.5 years, there's no question there was a huge impact in the corridor, 17 miles. And they called it the luge because they were going
They called it the Levitt luge, I'll point out.
Levitt luge, yes. And so so there's no question there was a huge impact. But the buy-in that we had politically through the Growth Summit and other things that we did with the legislature, and then also the buy-in from the public, once we communicated the process, the need, and the urgency to it, and the Olympics helped with that, I think their tolerance level was increased. And I just can't understate the importance of the public communications part of our project, keeping the public informed, paying for media, which is largely unheard of in the public transportation world. But that was a big, important part of keeping everybody on the team and supportive of the project.
You know, Governor, Tom, you talk about communications, and Governor, one of the lessons that I remember from sitting in your office working on another fun project, the Legacy Parkway project, was the importance of letting the right amount of people know ahead of time and at the right timing. And you had a little rule that you like to go back to.
I introduced them to my 30-30-40 rule. 30% what you announce, 30% how you actually express it, and 40% who you tell in advance. And we attempted to implement the 30-30-40 rule on not just specific, but overall. We wanted people to know what they would be experiencing so that it didn't come as a complete surprise. And I believe that was not just the fact that we did just over and over communicate, but that we made an effort to be proactive ahead of the time in our communication.
Yeah. Carlos, one thing that I think is important, so we make the decision for design build. which obviously we'd never done before at UDOT. And it took a retooling of the agency in terms of mindset. It took a retooling of the agency in terms of procedures. It took a retooling of just the organizational structure to create a team. And honestly, we sort of cherry-picked people to be on that team. And I was thinking about them as I drove in here on I-15 this morning.
Did it work okay?
It's working fine. Although, it's interesting enough, when we built it, people said, Tom, you're crazy. Why are you building 5 lanes in each direction? We're never going to need 5 lanes in each direction here.
Yeah.
Now you got a problem, Carlos.
I know. Thank you, Tom.
But retooling the agency was a big part of it, and it was very deliberate and specific in terms of the people and the structure to make it work.
Well, and part of that retooling was really going from means and methods to performance-based and outcome-based type of a contract. And I remember we had all different technical expertise trying to put together sections of how do you talk about the outcome that you want versus, we knew if you do things a certain way, if you run a roller 10 times over this dirt, you're going to get the compaction you need. But that scared a lot of us.
I think there's a big lesson here, too, that's all of us can note now with 25 years. And it is that things work out better when you are measuring and working toward results, value, as opposed to just a process. And if you want to, in my judgment, why this worked and why it continues to work is because it does align the incentives in a way that inspires and demands collaboration. Collaborative IQ, if you will, the ability for people and organizations to work together effectively to solve a common pain is a 21st century skill set. Teams will always outstrip an individual performance. And our current process at the time was all about individual players. And if a lot of the individual players weren't happy.
Oh, that was one of the surprises that I guess was my education as the director was when we presented this to the industry, both the construction and consulting industries. Those were some pretty hard days because it was not uniformly accepted. The concept of 10 years of work meant that a lot of small firms could do a lot of work over 10 years. And by introducing design build, it meant that the groups would have to come together, firms would have to team together to deliver the project. And that was something that made some people very uncomfortable. But eventually people got on board and the teams were formed, and we had 3 great teams who competed for the work.
Well, and they were worried the risk of out-of-state big guys coming in, right?
That was the fear, both in the engineering world and in the construction world, that larger firms would come in. But as it turned out, the local firms who wanted to be part of it were a part of it, and those that chose not to be were not.
We spent hours talking about this, and I was learning. I was just trying to understand not only the existing process, but as I would raise questions and we'd work our way through it. I mean, one of the ones that was this whole idea of design build. How do you keep them from cutting corners? And this response was, well, we're going to make them guarantee and with a 15-year warranty their work. And if it doesn't work, it'll be them that fixes it, and they're going to put money up essentially to design. And that made so much sense to me. We were going at this in a way that made sense as opposed to the way it had always been done. When Tom told me I want to put $50 million in incentives up front if they meet objectives along the way. Well, what are the objectives? Well, I want them to, the one I remember most is that you're keeping people happy with traffic. That'll be a primary objective. Why was I worried about that? Well, it's obvious to you. But the fact they were on time, that they were on budget, and they were keeping people happy, and that we had objective measures of that, it just made sense to me that these contractors over time were going to begin to bid this with that $50 million in mind, and that would drive the project, and that it would be driven by having a 15-year warranty. That just made sense. And I think that was part of my, again, I think the lesson for folks in this room are you really have to teach the people who are the decision makers. And Tom did a really good job in the department in teaching me and helping me to understand, kind of managing my learning process in a way that I could gain comfort and take what undoubtedly was the biggest political and economic risk of my life. I had teenage boys at the time, and one of them wanted to go on a trip to Lake Powell. And I knew they were going to be down there, and their buddies were going to want them to jump off the cliffs, do cliff jumping. And I remember saying to them, now, they're going to want you to jump off these cliffs. So when you get down, then I thought, I'm just about ready to jump off a cliff with Tom.
Tall cliff.
But we did it.
Yeah.
And it worked out. And a lot of it was because I was so effectively taught by people in the department.
Well, what you're talking about on this guarantee is one of the essential elements of the best value selection process that we used was in fact their warranty. And they had to actually put a number on what it was going to cost to implement their warranty. And the firm, or the joint venture that we selected, actually had the lowest number on the warranty element of the project. And when I asked their principal why their number was so low after the bidding was all completed and selection was made, he said, "We don't plan to come back. We're going to do such a good job here that we don't plan to come back." Contrast that to the third team, who had the very highest, almost astronomical number for maintenance. And I'm thinking to myself, what were they planning to do to come back to spend that kind of money? What kind of job were they going to do in the first place? But the winning team, the best value, was the one that said, we're going to do it right the first time, and we're not going to have to come back.
There were maybe 1,000 ways this could have just gone off the rails. And I had a list of things I worried about. A big worry for me was, what if the best value bid was not the lowest? How are the people in the legislature who had become partners as well? And we really need to say that this was not just Mike and Tom. The legislature came along with us. They were at the Growth Summit. They were in every meeting. I think, enabled a very good partnership. And we needed them because we had to manage the politics of this too, which I'll comment on.
Well, and you needed some revenue increases as well.
That's right.
You had some strong personalities in leadership.
Well, the process was, and we don't have time to talk through the selection process, but it was very confidential. We had contractors who came to me early on and said, we don't believe it'll be confidential, and so we don't trust giving you our final numbers. And so we had to prove to them as an agency, that as a government agency, which many government agencies aren't very well known for their confidentiality, that we were going to in fact keep their information in confidence. And a little story that involves Carlos here. So we're at the WASHTO meeting in Indianapolis, and he comes in with Byron Parker with the numbers, and I had not seen the numbers to that point. And they had probably didn't sleep the night before, knowing they were going to present to me the numbers, because it was a little higher than we expected. And
this was on the Legacy Parkway.
Oh, that was on the Legacy Parkway project.
Yeah.
The I-15 came in higher than we expected as well.
You might want to talk about that trip up to the governor's office to explain that.
Well, we had to go up to the governor's office.
That was a longer conversation.
Clint Topham and I went up to the governor's office once we had the numbers, and we were about to present it to the leadership of the legislature, and back to what the governor's talking about, having buy-in from the legislature. And I told Clint Topham, the director at the time, I said, Clint, we're going to go up there and we're either going to be heroes today or we're going to get fired, one or the other. There's not going to be any middle of the road. But the governor was very supportive of us, and he understood that while the number was higher than we expected, it was a good number, and there'd been a very competitive and true process that we'd followed, and that it was the number, the market number for the project, and that we needed to move forward.
I do think it'd be useful to talk a little bit about the politics of this, because politics is always part of these decisions. It became evident to me that if we were going to build this, and we were talking a couple of $1 billion, which was serious money back in those days, that we needed, and if it was going to be basically a Salt Lake County project, that I had to manage the geography politics of this. When I grew up in southern Utah, and I always thought it was southern Utah against Salt Lake City. When I became governor, I realized, no, it's Salt Lake and everybody else. And that was an important realization, because if we were to get this done, we had to find a way to do something big enough that we weren't just dealing with one highway in one county, in one region of the state. As important as it was to everybody, you couldn't make that case if their main street was not adequate. So we created what we called the Centennial Highway Fund. And this was a 10-year, a decade-long project. We had 44 different projects, and it covered every part of the state. Everyone got something out of this. Now, that isn't just about spreading grease around to get something done. It was, we had a legitimate problem everywhere. And so rather than look at the politics as just one road project, we had to again go back to quality of life, and we had to not talk about one area. It was a statewide issue. The second is we had to raise money.
It was a
8
nickel
cents?
gas tax, doubling of the vehicle registration
Yeah.
fee, and you used general fund.
And we have a very conservative legislature, so going to them was going to be an issue. And so, we had worked to prepare this, but it was also pretty good economic times. And I knew in the beginning this was the way to get this done was, in the end, to do a sales tax reduction and a gas tax increase. And it got all the way to the second to last day of the legislature, and there was a standoff, and there was a meeting in the governor's office, and there's the Speaker of the House and the governor and the Senate president having a standoff over this, and I was not budging on my gas, and finally the Speaker of the House said, look, if you'll give me an 1/8 of a cent sales tax reduction, I can sell your I-15 user tax proposals. And I said, Mel, if you can do that, you have a deal. He walked upstairs, produced it, we passed it. I'll never forget the moment. I'd go out for walks at lunch, and I knew the legislature was going to be acting on this during that period, and I went out by myself, and I'm walking through the rotunda of the legislature, and I can hear them up there working on it, thinking, this is either going to happen today or it's not going to happen. And it was a very noteworthy day for both of us, wasn't it? For all of us.
Yeah. Well, the governor talks about the Centennial Highway Fund and the projects. He asked myself and Clint Topham, my deputy director at the time, and the chairman of our commission, Glenn Brown, to go and meet with legislators around the state and get to know their needs. And that was really the genesis of this list of projects. And I have to say, those legislators were uniformly grateful that we would even ask them, what's your biggest concern in your community? And not to disparage our process, our planning process and so forth at UDOT, but sometimes we miss some of those specific things in a community. And that brought them to the table in a way that I don't think they would have been at the table. To try to fund I-15 as a standalone project would have been impossible. But you fund it as part of a package of projects that had statewide value and influence. Then everybody was on board, and everybody had an ownership to I-15. I remember during the construction, they'd want to go on tours. We gave so many tours of the project to legislators who just wanted to see it. They might have been from Washington County or from some other part of the state, but they wanted to be on the project because they felt that ownership and that interest in the project.
Yeah, so Tom, you mentioned the importance of tours, I think that all gets into the realm of communication, of keeping if people feel like they're part of it, they own it a little bit. You also had an interesting, I don't know if everyone picked up that the name Brown was used in two ways. We had the Speaker of the House was Mel Brown. His brother, Glenn Brown, former Speaker of the House, was chairman of the Transportation Commission at the time. Was Glenn's position helpful for you, Tom?
Glenn was helpful first because of his knowledge of the legislative process. He had been the Speaker of the House and was amazingly insightful from that standpoint. But Glenn had a very solid, he's a dairy farmer, had a very straightforward view of life, and that brought a lot of value to it. We had to sell our commission on design build. A lot of people don't realize that, but they became our great supporters. Another part of the way the commission fed into this is when we got down to the point of the selection process, the governor said to me, Tom, I know you have the authority statutorily to make the selection and in the award, but here's what I want you to do. He says, I want you to have a panel made up of the commissioners and yourself to go through this. Now, they're not to second guess you, they're not to make the decision because that's not their statutory authority, but I want them in the room when you make the decision. And at first, I have to admit, I was a little put off by that. I think I'm the director, but the wisdom of that proved out in that when it was all said and done and we made the selection, and there were a few people who spoke against what we did, the commissioners that were in the room could stand up and say, we saw what Tom saw, and we heard what Tom heard. We saw the numbers that were presented, and his decision is the same as would be our decision. And so the wisdom of the governor basically protecting me as the director by giving me that backstop, that support was really, really important. And the wisdom of that proved out.
And protecting the process.
Process, yes.
Yeah.
But, process interesting. Get me off on a tangent here, Carlos. I had one of the contractors called me and said, Tom, I'm getting a lot of pressure to hire a lobbyist. This is before we even did the selection, even before it went out, so we could still talk to him. And I said, what's that for? And he says, well, I'm being told by the lobbyist that this is going to be a political process and that we better have a lobbyist so we can get selected. And I said, you don't need a lobbyist. That's not the way this is going to go down. It's going to be a straight-up process. And I think that proved out to be that way, not political at all.
And I think that's another major takeaway here, that if you're going to be engaged in judgment, the process needs to be as transparent as it possibly can. Yeah. And I learned this over and over in public service. There are a lot of people with equities in decisions. People who've worked hard and have formed points of view and who have interests. And when things don't go their way, if a political leader or a head of a department makes a decision that does not comport with their judgment, they intuitively believe that there's something amiss and they're suspicious. And I learned that having people in the room, when you receive the information and hear the questions, and then witness the decision firsthand. This is, again, kind of goes back to telling people in advance. It protects the process, and I think Tom's was right and wise in doing so. And there's a lesson here in this: when you're using alternative methods of awarding work, I think that's particularly important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Governor, was it important during the process to show progress and demonstrate measurable progress?
Well, we talk about this in an hour. It understates the amount of anxiety that went on after the award.
Yeah.
Because then we started tearing bridges and overpasses down, and then it narrowed to 2 lanes. I will say that I think the contractor managed the traffic in a brilliant way, because people just, their lives went on. We were able to, it was inconvenient, but they could see the end of it. It wasn't going to be 10 years, it was going to be 4. And by the way, I ran for re-election in the middle of all of this. And I thought, this is But the truth is, it really wasn't that intense an issue because people could see progress. And I've always been grateful for that. Tom and I joke occasionally that Tom and I were perfectly aligned in all of this. We both knew our careers were on the line.
Yeah.
But the point of the matter is, 4 years passed, and we tried to demonstrate victories all the way along. When there was a new overpass, we celebrated it. When any part of the road was going to be open, we celebrated it. I don't know how. There must have been a division of celebrations at the department.
Yeah.
I see somebody who was involved in that shaking his head.
We, speaking of the process, the design build, which UDOT had not done heretofore, and that took some cultural changes at the agency, and an acceptance that not all good ideas, and I think every Department of Transportation has to come to this realization if you're going to truly embrace design build, is not all good ideas emanate from within the agency. And we could spend hours here talking about the innovations that the contractor and the engineering team that we hired to do this job brought to the project, things that we had never even thought about, things that would have never been on the table for us to consider in the way of practices. We were to reconstruct all the interchanges through the valley, and the contractor said, we would like to propose to do each one of those in 6 months and close it down completely, do it in 6 months, instead of a year and a half of construction. And we went to each of the cities and gave them that alternative, meeting with the mayors and the city councils, and they all chose that as an alternative. No, we would have never done that. Honestly,
I don't think we could get away with that today, Tom.
Well, maybe not today, yes.
Right.
But in those days, we did, and they accepted it. And but there were many, many innovations that came forward that were not part of our skill set, let's say, as an agency. And so basically, you take a good Department of Transportation and partner it with the industry and the very smart things coming out of industry, and I think you get the best solution possible.
Yeah, it was interesting time because the I-15 team was basically co-housed with the consulting partners and working kind of independent of the department. And we had a little bit, I think, that we realized afterwards, we developed this I-15 team and the rest of the department. And how do we keep it as one organization where everyone is buying into that? And that became something that was a bit of a challenge as we move forward, because you're going to apply a lot of focus and a lot of attention on those people because we've got it on the line with them right there. Yep. So, Governor, as you look back at this and you think about why, how you did this and why you did it, what are some of the things that, you think about that, you wish you had done differently, or that you're really happy you made those decisions?
As I talked earlier, I've found value in looking at these things 25 years later, because my entire life experience now can be focused on what could be learned from that. And here's a list of things that I learned. First, putting things in a larger context. If this was just a highway project, we would have struggled. Putting it in the context of a contributor to a much larger public vision was important. Second, understand the politics. If we had just tried to build one thing, we would have had a difficult time because the rest of the state had needs, and so we had to balance those things. We had to balance the ideology. The third was build the case. We spent a year and a half building the case before we actually went about this, and we did it in some unorthodox ways. I talked about the Growth Summit. I think fourth is recognizing that risk has to be evaluated in the context of the circumstance and alternatives. We were in a position where we needed to take higher than average risks because of our situation. I think next is that innovation is enabled by the absence of alternatives, or by necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, I guess. Next, I think, is the power of collaborative IQ. You can win with a team where you would struggle with individual performers, and that's the key. I think the seventh is the power of the fact that there are aligned incentives. Tom and I were aligned. We had common pain. We aligned the incentives of the contractor with that common pain. We aligned the way they could come out on the project. I think another is that people make all the difference. This honestly could have failed an innumerable number of ways, and other people in this audience made this happen. It was because they were given the chance to do it. I think that I said earlier, measure value and not just process. I think that's another thing that we can learn from this. I'm sure there are other lessons. You'll have your own after having heard this story, but I think it's a powerful illustration of the way the public business can be conducted in a unique and innovative way.
Tom, as you look back at this, I mean, I remember I've said this over and over again for the last 25 years, and you look at Tom Warren here, and he might not look like the biggest risk taker you've ever seen. Now, I'm an engineer, so my perspective's a little different, but Tom, I think you're the biggest risk taker I've ever met. And do you think of yourself that way? Is this something that has been part of your life all the way through, or was this a unique point in time and the biggest risk you've ever taken?
I guess I wouldn't define myself as a risk taker, although, yeah, I probably have those attributes. I just feel like when there's a job to get done, you figure out how to get it done. And often that requires taking risks. And this was one of those moments. And starting with the meeting in the very short meeting in the governor's office, where we knew where True North was after that. And we
So clear direction's important.
Clear direction. You know, sort of to answer the question you posed to the governor, unfailing support from Governor Levitt was essential here. This was not an easy road to, and no pun intended, for us to go down. And there were many challenges, and it was essential to have his unfailing support, and we had the governor's unfailing support through this whole thing. As I thought about our team, I have come to the conclusion that within our departments of transportation, you have people who are capable of far more than what our systems and our leadership, point the finger at ourselves, what our systems and our leadership allow them to achieve. There is so much capacity out there in those people. As we found on I-15, we took great people, but
Ordinary.
regular people, and who had great potential, and by taking the shackles off and the constraints that are often part of a Department of Transportation world, that team achieved incredible things, unthinkable things in 1995. Would have been unthinkable in 1995, and yet they did it. So that would be another takeaway from this thing, is unleashing the potential is really held back. And the last thing I think is that partnership with the industry. We are better when we are partners, positive partners. I've done a lot of partnering all over the country, as many of you are aware, and I've seen a lot of relationships that are not positive relationships. But when there is a positive relationship between the industry and the agency, where there's trust and confidence and willingness to work together and cooperate, we achieve our finest results as an industry, collective industry. And so those are the three takeaways that I would say.
Thanks, Tom. So, Governor, maybe one last question with you, and then we'll see if the audience has anything. But, Governor, I know you're writing a book, right? Or you're writing your
I'm writing a personal history.
history. Is this part of that history?
Well, I made this list. I took it out of I made a list of what did I learn from I-15? What did I learn from that whole process? And so this was easy to prepare for today. There's a long list of lessons, so yes, I'm writing a book. I don't know how many people will A, be interested, or B, have access to it, but there'll be wisdom in it, and some. Because not all my decisions turned out this well.
Well, and we've had conversations over the last several years. You were thinking, at least as I remember, you were thinking, what can we take from that approach of design build into other industries, into other processes?
I can't tell you how many times I've told this story in the context of healthcare, or the environment, or the value of collaborative thinking and the power of good, of putting as a leader in a team in a position to succeed. I began to, I've reflected back on that short meeting. I wish I could say that short meeting was short because I was this wise manager who was going to be, I just didn't have a lot to say. But over time, I learned the importance of those short meetings. I learned as a senior executive, I could call a group of people together and say, this is the challenge we have, and I need a solution, and you need a solution, and I want to schedule a meeting 3 weeks from now, and I need you to come back. And they will move heaven and earth to come up with a solution that if you sat in the room by yourself and tried to, and that's a power of good leadership, is to be able to use your role as a leader to enable people to think creatively and innovatively. And I've seen it at different levels where I've responded that way. You go to the White House for a meeting with the president, you're going to be prepared with ideas. And as a cabinet member, when I knew there was a meeting 3 weeks from today and I was going to be responsible to come up with a solution, I thought hard and I enabled other people. And so I would just say the power of the short meeting is profound. I can't say this meeting came about as a result of my full use of that power, but I've learned from it, and I think you can too, in your own experience and in just hearing this one.
Thank you, Governor. So as I've thought back preparing for this moment, I've realized the things that I took away from the experience where I touched it in various ways. And I referenced I was working on a project, Legacy Parkway project, which was another design build, fairly, I'll say, interesting environmental process. And I had the experience, I'll say opportunity, to bring bad news to the governor multiple times about how that process was going. And the way a leader reacts to bad and difficult news and setting clear it's really important. So think about how you react when you hear things that aren't going well. You can either allow people to continue to be willing to move forward, or they're going to curl up and they're going to be afraid to move forward. That initial reaction, and it can be just in your face and how you do that. So being positive about how you set that, and then setting clear direction. A lot of times it's a lot easier just to set a very broad idea and say, got done with that. And if they don't hit what I'm talking about, then we'll have a conversation. So be really tight and clear on what your expectations are. And then the communication piece. I use that over and over again. Think about who needs to know the information ahead of time so they're part of the message. They're not being told the message. So I really appreciate the opportunity for you folks to be here today. Good friends, and I know Elizabeth, I think, might be out there. We might have microphones out there. So I know the governor and Tom would love to be able to take any questions from the audience. Yes. Is that Lynn there? Yes, Lynn.
During the I-15 construction, you did an innovative practice of putting conduit system within I-15 and up to Park City on I-80 and around 215. And this wasn't done at that time. It was really amazing that Utah had that. And we were watching it in Utah County when you were doing Digital Utah, and we were trying to promote all this fiber optic communications. How much of a part of I-15, or what are some of the backstories that you have on this? I mean, I know Olympics and a few things, but I've got you two sitting here, and this is a question I've been dying to ask. That's why I sat center, and I was hoping I got the chance.
Tom, so Lynn runs our fiber area here, and there was a fairly large direction, big project, just that ITS component, Intelligent Transportation component. I think Lynn's talking about what that.
Yeah. Well, I think it was an important part of the project, and that initiative largely came from within the department. I can't say that was my idea. We had done some work with that ITS in Arizona before I came to Utah, but there was a vision within the engineering group at UDOT that really has set really a nice base for everything else you've done since then. But the I-15 project kind of gave us the sort of the impetus to really move it forward in a way that would have been hard to do in a 10-year project or piecemeal around the country. So it was an opportunity to leverage that technology and really create an opportunity for the rest of what you've done, Carl.
So when you're doing big things, look for opportunities
Yeah.
to use that leverage for other things.
Yeah.
I'll just say, and it's also, at the same time, this was the early 90s, and we were trying to wire the state for the internet.
Yeah.
And so that was a place where it was, I feel confident that the folks managing that priority saw this as the opportunity and came to UDOT and said, wow, you've got a secret for us. And we were all aligned in the larger vision of quality, not just building a road.
And Governor, I think at the time, if I have this correct, you were the leader in setting up the Western Governors University, and that whole idea of being able to learn over the internet.
You know, there's a different connection. So Western Governors University is a university that advances students on the basis of competency as opposed to seat time. The equivalent of seat time is a process where you had to break I-15 down into 20 separate contracts and do them sequentially as opposed to in parallel. So there's a principle here. I mentioned it earlier, and that is measure competency, measure value, measure outcome, as opposed to worshiping process. And I felt like that higher education was worshiping process. And so Western Governors concluded, look, let's essentially create a university that advances on the basis of what people have actually accomplished in learning. It's the same principle applied in two different sectors, but a very important principle.
Anyone else? Yes, Tom. It wouldn't be a meeting if Tom didn't ask the question. Tom Clements.
Take off my Texas diaper. Sort of inspired by your title, I want to make a comment and ask a question. And since I'm semi-retired, it'll be a little self-serving, Carla. So welcome back, Tom, to WASHTO.
Thank you.
Utah has always been a leader in so many areas, and one of those that gets a little bit down in the weeds, it's a tool of people, is technology. So you've also been a leader. You know, back in that period, we were just going from automated drafting to design. And you and all your partners, you know, use these tools and you push the industry to do more with them to attain productivity. Since I'm semi-retired, I'll give generous credit to partners, and I'll give credit to our competitors too. Drew, you know, Autodesk led the world in bringing BIM to the vertical market. Now, I always tell my architect friends, well, you're dealing with little 5-acre spaces, not 17 miles where the Earth's surface changes. So maybe to Carlos, because you were a design squad leader back then, would you comment on the role of technology? Not so much then, but going forward, we still have this big challenge as we're trying to do 3D modeling and intelligence, and it's much harder than what we were dealing with then.
It takes time, it takes effort, people have to learn new things, but we have to always be pushing ourselves to be looking to adapt and really start using as new a technology as possible, because soon you're going to find yourself so far behind, it's going to be hard to make that jump forward. But it's a cultural change that you have to manage. Your folks know how to do their work with what they have today, and helping them see the why they should do something differently, why they should learn something new, how it's going to help them be better, how it's going to help them do it easier, how it's going to help provide more value to the organization. You can't jump over and say, we need to do this. You have to always, I believe, start with the why and help people understand that. So but I've also, when I've had folks from technology companies, no insult to anyone, I had a shovel, a silver shovel that we use on a groundbreaking up in Ogden. I kept it in my closet, and every now and then I'd pull that out and say, this is, and I think John would say this, you're a silver shovel. You know, it's not about the technology. It's nice to have, though, and I don't know if technology and
Well, I'll just say this, feeding back to Tom's story of nobody ever thought there'd be need for 5 lanes. So I'm driving down I-15 a year ago, and traffic's pretty intense, and I'm thinking to myself, I thought we solved this problem. and then I realized it's been 18 years.
Tom, Governor, the design life was 2015.
That's right.
It was a 20-year design life at 95 to 2015.
And I realized it's been longer. We're at the end now. And so the value of this story isn't what we are telling about the great thing we did 20 years ago. The value is that somebody in this crowd, everybody in this crowd, is going to, at some point in time, have to make their version of the I-15 decision. And if you can learn from what we experienced, you'll look back 20 years and be able to learn your lessons. But here's the underlying lesson. Leadership is a generational relay. You build on what you're handed, and then it's your job to take it the next leg. And so the value of this discussion is, what will you do during your part of this race?
Sounds like a good place to stop here, Governor.
Good.
So
Thank you
let's
for having
join me in thanking Governor Levitt, Tom Warren.
Good. I enjoyed that.
Thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you,
You're that
Tom.
next generation.
I'm almost at the back end. Okay. Am I supposed to give instructions now? I see a head nodding. Are we on break? Yes? Break for half an hour? Break for half an hour. Thank you all. And there it is.